Welcome to Conduct Detrimental. We're really
Thank you.
privileged to have you join us today for a very special episode we've been teasing. So welcome to our podcast.
Hey, you guys are experts at what you do. I rely on your guys' work, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, you and I met a couple of years ago, back in the days when sports betting was largely illegal across the country, with the exception of Nevada.
Hmm.
Uh, I guess I got onto your radar back in December of 2017 when you made your initial foray, I guess, in writing about what the future of legalized sports betting would mean for the NBA and how it would change the NBA. So now, we haven't talked in 3.5 to 3 years or so. How has sports betting affected the NBA from your lens, going back to I guess, the day PASPA was overturned?
Yeah, well, I mean, we knew that the case was coming. I can't remember if the case was argued yet, but when we talked, um,
Right around that time, it was December of 2017. I think you spoke to me like right after the oral argument, or
yeah,
right around that time. I
yeah.
remember it
I mean,
vividly.
yeah, I'm not a legal scholar by any stretch, but if you listened to the oral arguments in that case, it seemed like it was pretty clear that the justices were leaning towards striking down PAPSA and changing the sports betting landscape. And if you were really paying attention to it like you were, you were already well known in that then very small industry that is growing by the week. I really wanted to have some experts to educate me. And at ESPN, I'm sometimes a victim of being too early on things where I um, s- maybe not right and cover them too early in terms of the industry, but write about them more maybe sooner than the readers or my bosses are ready for them.
Hmm.
Like I wrote my first article about the NBA bubble like last April, and nobody was even thinking about the bubble. And I don't even think the story was
Hmm.
really all that well read. So I'm sort of a victim of looking ahead a little bit. It'd be better if I was ahead on stocks. I wouldn't need the
Right.
job. But
Funny.
Oh,
It's
well,
funny.
by the way, Brian,
I was going to say,
for all of my legal expertise, and you hit the nail on the head from the way the justices were conducting the questioning. It seemed pretty obvious PASPA was going to be overturned, and we could have gone into the stock market at that point, and it was clear as day that PASPA was going to be overturned. Can you imagine investing a little bit in the public gaming stocks at that time that were public and just letting it ride over the next 3.5 years? You'd be a millionaire just from
yeah,
a nominal investment. So I feel as if I missed the boat on getting in at sort of the ground level of this, stock betting, or this sports betting stock market bubble.
Dan, if I can just jump in quick, Brian is alluding to something that he might be ahead of the curve on, and maybe an opportunity for us all to get an ahead of something before this industry fully booms. So, Brian, part of the reason we wanted to have you on, you just wrote a fantastic piece on NBA Top Shot, which I know is coming onto a lot of people's radars because of the work that you did. And I do want to give you a little credit. The article that you wrote back in April on the bubble, like, we read it because there was a lot of interesting liability issues in there, and there was
hmm,
interesting stuff on coach age discrimination about guys not being able
for
to
sure.
sideline. So that stuff that we ate up as lawyers. So I don't know if it was so well read in the full sphere, but for lawyers, I know that made its rounds in our circles. So don't sell yourself short. That was a very good piece. But I guess, Brian, we want to have you on here. Dan was at the head of the sports betting movement, at this point, maybe 9 years ago. But this Top Shot movement, I mean, it's really a year in the making. So for those that don't know, Brian, you want to fill us in about what you kind of see of this Top Shot market, blockchain changing NBA and the sports kind of investment market?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are well aware. I mean, and I'm sure anybody listens to this podcast. I mean, your audience is probably a little more savvy than the general audience. So you're all aware that the memorabilia market has been insane during the pandemic. And you could probably get on an economist and a sociologist to try to explain that. And this is sort of an intersection of fortune, because this device, I don't even know what to call it, this digital entity, has been in the works for over a year. I mean, they released it last year during the finals. The idea was to release it when it would get publicity, but I don't remember it at all in October. I really didn't even hear about it till early January. So the NBA about 3 years ago really felt like there was opportunities in the blockchain space. So I am not an expert at all on blockchain. What I do know, I can just say, and I apologize to people out there who know more than me, and you'll slap your head and say, "Boy, this guy is a neophyte nincompoop." It's essentially a digital online ledger that exists decentralized. So it's not controlled by a government or a company, and so in a way, it's sort of democratic, or it's independent, and it that platform enables business to be operated in different ways. And so the NBA was looking, the NBA licenses all kinds of stuff, guys. They license paint, the official paint of the NBA, the official deodorant of the NBA, the official whatever of the NBA. They do some of these deals. They've had memorabilia deals with Topps. I don't know when the first Topps NBA set, probably before I was born, probably in the 70s, 60s. I mean, they may have been doing licensing deals with sport car companies for 40, 50 years. This was different though. They wanted to do a memorabilia deal on the blockchain. And on the blockchain, meaning not tangible, not in existence, in existence only, in a digital form. And they made a deal with this company, and not just the NBA, the Players Association too, because the Players Association has name and likeness deals, and that's a whole thing. The Players Association has its own name and likeness entity now called Think 450. That's another podcast for another day. But they sat at the table together and interviewed a whole bunch of these companies. All these companies came to the NBA in late 2017, 2018, and made presentations. Here's why we should, you should go into business with us and give us your licensing deal for this blockchain entity. And the company they picked was this Canadian company based in Vancouver called Dapper Labs. And the reason they picked them was because they had done one digital memorabilia, digital collectible, which was digital photographs of cats.
Great business, online cat, especially for lawyers nowadays. Lawyer cats are making it big right now.
Your overhead is relatively low, although actually not at all. And so those were called crypto kitties, and they were extraordinarily popular for a small piece of the population. I mean, it wasn't like it took the world by storm, but they were hot at the time. And so, it wasn't like they had a list of companies that had all these. They picked the company who had done one of them, and so they did the deal in early 2019, announced it in mid 2019, and they spent a year on the rollout. And so what it is the NBA licenses video clips to Dapper Labs, and Dapper Labs sells these video clips in little packages. And so for each player, and they sell, I think they have them for every player. I don't know if they're all on sale yet, but the idea is that every player would have one, or the majority of players would have one. And they are little 8, 10, 13-second clips. And it could be a shot, it could be a pass, it could be a block, it could be a steal. And they sell them. They sell them in little packs where you digitally open them and you see what's in there. And they're called moments. And it's an interesting idea. If you had told me this 4 months ago, I'd have said, okay. I mean, I'm going to not be a stick in the mud. I'm going to try to be Mr. 2021. I'm not going to look at this sideways and say that it doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense that a thin piece of cardboard is worth $5 million. What Mickey Mantle rookie card just sold for. It only makes sense if people value it and we all value it. We all value paper currency is what's printed on the currency. It's all just a confidence game. So I recognize that I guess some people would be interested in this. What I didn't understand and didn't foresee and had to try to understand was that this was going to just become a huge market for speculation and investment, and money has poured in. The day my story came out, they did $7 million in sales just that day, and I haven't checked it this morning, but I think they were passing $80 million in sales in the last 45 days.
So
Um,
of that 7 million, Brian, 6 million came between Dan and I. So
Good for you. I hope you can
um
resell.
we
How much of that goes to the NBA? Do you know the terms of
I,
the revenue share or the licensing deal? So I can get a sense of how much of this filters to the teams and then ultimately indirectly down to the players as basketball related income.
Daniel, it's a great question. I don't know the answer, and that's a private contract. So while the numbers on the blockchain, the reason why collectors are so interested in it is because, unlike with a card, like I don't know if you guys collected sports cards when you were kids or collect them today, but when a card is, when you open a package of tops, or even if you went to a card show and you bought a specific card that you valued, you really didn't know how many of those cards existed. I mean, you thought that this card was valuable and rare, but then eBay comes along, in the 90s, and a card that you thought was really valuable, there's tens of thousands of them actually available. And it's like, well, this card may be interesting, but it's not really that rare and not really that valuable. The blockchain enables the users to see exactly how many cards have been created, exactly what they've all sold for. So, if I sell a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card to my friend, for a couple $100, I don't know that one maybe has just sold for 3,000 in, Hawaii or Japan. I don't know what the market is. I mean, there's some for the highest end, but you don't really have a great idea for the market, even within platforms. One might sell on eBay for this, one might sell on another site for that. In this case, because it's the blockchain, everybody can see what cards have been created, what they've all sold for. And the real interesting thing is that the secondary market, the resale, for the most part, takes place within Dapper Labs environment. You can do it off platform, but there's some risk involved with it, so nobody really is. And so Dapper can charge royalties. So the way I put it in my story is the NBA in partnership can be both the Picasso and the Sotheby's. I think it's, depending on the size of the transaction, it's 5 or 10%. And you may say, well, that's not that big of a deal. But if this gets to volume, where it gets to, billions of dollars in sales, that the idea that you could participate in secondary market sales as a owner of intellectual property, what the NBA and the Players Union are, it's extremely exciting to them. So getting all the way back to where you started this question, which is how much do they get? I don't know the terms of the deal. And right now, even as I said, it's probably $80 million in the last month and a half. It's still probably just a really fraction of that. But they're more excited about the long term and what this could be if this catches on and is not just a fad.
Yeah, so I think, on that, I mean, I know the story came out a couple weeks ago. Someone purchased a LeBron moment. I think it was like 70 grand. And it's probably an interesting investment, right? This technology's only been around a year. I know they're in talks, or I don't know how those progress, but with UFC to do their own version of that deal. The question, and I think where this ties into our legal background, like we could talk, right? Like I think I heard something like LaMelo, LaMelo moments are like, going up in prices, right? Because people view maybe he's the next rookie of the year, maybe he's the next big thing.
Right.
As someone that has researched the sports card market, there's a version of this that goes on at like Topps and all these companies now with there's a select amount of like orange foil cards or black foil cards. So there's
Right.
one of 5 or there's one of 10.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
so I think people in that industry could see something like this coming, right? That you could follow the market. The problem is, I don't know, and maybe it's I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but with this whole Robinhood, controversy that occurred a couple weeks ago, we're seeing some holes where a market could be manipulated in a way that's maybe good, maybe bad, but the SEC can kind of step in and try to regulate that, right? There's laws
Right.
come into place and try to curtail either good or bad inflation or deflation. Do you foresee, Brian, any type of issues right now? Like this is a private industry, right? It's not regulated by the open markets. The Top Shot could fall into some problems because it could be manipulated in some way, good or like, for example, right? I'm making this up. This is not a real, but like, the Aaron Baines fan club on Twitter, right? Like those guys are
Right.
very vocal, right? Let's say
Right.
they just wanted to pump up Aaron Baines' stock, and they could do it in a fungible way. Do you see that potentially being an issue in a non-regulated market like this is?
Yeah, Dan, it's a great question for sure. So, you see a moment, a video clip sell for $100,000. You see who the two users are. Some of the users put their names right on there. I mean, I was able, the guy who bought the story that I wrote about this guy who paid $100,000 for a Zion Williamson blocked shot highlight.
Was it Dan Wallach?
um, if it was, I mean, what are you doing on this podcast? You got that kind of money to throw around. I mean, I was able to track him down very simply. His name is right on the user account, but obviously they've got all these users and they have all these usernames. I mean, I could create user one and sell the user two, sell them myself. Now, granted, I'd have to pay a fee, a transaction fee. I'd lose some money in the transaction. But if I wanted to take this card and all of a sudden increase its value, I could just sell them myself. It's a manipulation of the market. And, and I've talked to collectors about this, and the collectors say, absolutely, that is 100% true. But that same risk of fraud exists in the sports card market as well. We don't know how that works. And so, yeah. And, so you say to yourself, well, does the NBA bear any, risk here? Because they're a partner and they're, their fans, are going to do this. Can they say, we'll back this up? And, the NBA's position is, this is just, we are licensor and licensee, just like we are with Upper Deck or Panini, like we have been for decades. And, it's, you operate at your own risk. So yeah, that's a real concern, especially because all of it exists within the Dapper Labs environment. And so I don't know. The company has only been around a few years. I don't know, but I will say this: they're reportedly. I mean, this is not my reporting, but reportedly they're close to doing a $250 million raise, which is going to value them at $2 billion. And I would assume, but maybe I shouldn't, that those companies are vetting as much as they can. And I think they're going to use that money to go out and do deals with UFC. And, I'm sure they'll chase the NFL and they'll chase other sports leagues to try to do this. But when I talked to the NBA about this, they said they see this as a long-term partnership. That, and one of the things that the NBA mentioned to me is, look, we've got this giant archive of these video moments that we can sell. And so you start to think about, what about if they did the Michael Jordan, the shot? Like, what if they sold one out of, if they made 5 of them, they could auction those for who knows, or they could go a whole other route and, like, instead of auctioning just, clips of the games, they could auction clips of guys arriving in their arrival fashion show, clips. So
being drafted, on the podium, right?
But your point of, like, from a legal point, I mean, yeah, it's the wild, wild west. And, again, it's a Canadian company. I don't know, like, what the rules of the road are on, like, the transactions. I don't know where it's, like, registered and based, or where the servers are. Yeah, it's it's definitely a risk, and it's definitely manipulatable. The reason that the collectors say that they believe this is the future, and granted, millions of people collect sports cards. Right now, it's just tens of thousands that are doing this. So it's still a slice of the market. But when you have a card and you want to sell it for any meaningful amount, you have to get the card rated by a third-party agency.
Right,
PSA is
the that's the big one.
So you gotta ship it off. So you gotta trust the UPS or FedEx or the mail, and then you have to trust the subjective guy who's, granted they're professionals, but you gotta, you hear stories about people who send them off one day and they get rated an 8, break them out of the pack, send it back again, they get rated a 9. So then you got to ship back to you, and then when you do the transaction, it was sell. You got to worry about, if you're buying, you got to worry about there being fraud or whatever. So this is all exists all digitally, and it's all right there on the blockchain. So it removes the friction, and that's why people are investing in it. The other thing is, when I talk to the people at Dapper Labs, especially the CEO of the company, by the way, doesn't know anything about. I mean, I shouldn't say he doesn't know anything. He's a cryptocurrency and crypto expert. He doesn't.
He's also a cat guy.
Yes, he loves cats apparently. He doesn't really know that much about the NBA, but the thing that he talked about with me was when he learned about how people were selling fractions of cards and fractions of like shoes. So, there's a huge secondary market for Nike shoes, Jordans and what have you. And there are people who, groups of people who own, a group of investors who may own a pair of shoes, and they may never actually see the shoes with their own eyes. And there are services where cards are just kept in vaults. They basically act like banks, and a group of people will sell a card to another group of people, and the ownership will transfer, but the card will stay in the vault. They never actually see. So people own like slices of a piece of cardboard that they'll never physically hold. I saw there's a company called Rally, and I some people are like, no, duh, you idiot. I mean, of course, but I'm such a neophyte in this. There's a company called Rally that sells a whole bunch of stuff like this. But last week they announced that they are going to sell a piece of the court from Kobe Bryant's last game that has his number on it. I believe it was number 8 because they had an 8 and a 24, and Kobe signed it that night, signed the court. And so they have those squares with his number on it. They're not going to chop it up. They're just going to hold it, I assume, in their vault, and they're going to sell shares of it to fans. I think I can't remember the amount of money that it was going to be. I don't remember if it was $8 or $24 or whatever it was. And so and by the way, that'll sell out. So people are going to buy shares of a piece of memorabilia that they will never touch. And so that sort of market has already existed. So he was just saying there's already sort of this these people are already investing in stuff like this. So why shouldn't we create this, make a deal with the NBA and create this? And I have to say, it's not the worst idea I've ever heard.
Okay. Brian, we focus so much on the business of the NBA, sports betting, and there's these digital, videos. I want to talk about the quality of the game. I've been a fan of the NBA going back to 1970. I think it's probably half a century in the game. I've seen the evolution of, tanking reach epic proportions. You've had a real close view of LeBron James' career, going back to when you covered him in high school. He's changed the fortunes of 4 NBA franchises, the Cavaliers twice, the Heat, and the Lakers. Is there too much of a temptation? Obviously, the answer is yes, but what can be done to sort of eliminate the incentives for teams not to give it their all? Because the current system really leaves a lot of fans almost rooting for their teams to not make the playoffs, to try to aggregate some, high draft picks to eventually land the next LeBron James. Has this led to a decline in sort of the competitive integrity and competitive balance in the league when teams aren't giving it their best shot?
Well, Daniel, this has been going on for a long time, and it's just the nature of the game of basketball. Because in a 5-man game, one player can change so much, and so when that player comes along, getting the LeBron James of a draft, and it's so rare. It's a huge difference maker. I mean, the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'll just put you this way: the Cleveland Cavaliers haven't won a playoff series without LeBron James on their roster.
I don't think they've been in a playoff series, right?
Since 1993. 1993 was the last time they won a playoff series without LeBron on their roster. The thing about it is that as sports leagues have matured, and general managing has become more from a sort of intuitive role into an analytic role, where
Mhm.
guys try to find um, edges, whether that's through math or through strategy. Um,
Mhm.
the executives in the NBA identified that a way to really improve is to get the highest draft pick possible. And it's the same kind of thinking that led famously in the book Moneyball, and Billy Bean became well known for this. He realized that other teams didn't value players who walked a lot. And it wasn't that he thought that walks were the greatest thing in the history of the game, but he didn't have much money to spend, and he realized he could buy players and acquire players who could get on base a lot, and so that's what the players he got. The NBA, Sam Hinkie, the general manager of the 76ers for a while, personified this, but it was done by a lot of teams. They looked at the lay of the land and they were like, this is the way to go. Tank, get a high draft pick several years in a row. That's your best chance of getting players. And in a vacuum, like, I can't blame them for it. And so the league has tried to push back against this by changing the lottery odds and flattening them out a little bit. But it's really a philosophy. It's really a philosophy thing. So, like, recently in the NBA, the New York Knicks traded for Derrick Rose, and a lot of people celebrated that trade. And they said, "Oh, the Knicks are trying to make the playoffs. They went out and got this well-known point guard who has played for Tom Thibodeau, the coach, in two other places. Great move by the Knicks. Great move. Terrific. They gave up a second-round pick for him. Great move." There were other players who were like, "Whew, that wasn't such a good idea, because this increases the Knicks' chances of making the playoffs, and
Mhm.
being sixth or seventh best team, it doesn't really help you. But if you miss the playoffs and you can get a high lottery pick in a year where there's a great draft like this year is supposed to be, that may advance you further." And that's really the rub on fandom. And
But
it's not good for the league to do it, that to have a team lose, but it may be good for the teams. And that's a real 2021 pro
I,
sports dilemma.
listen, I've fallen into that negative thinking too. I'm a Knicks fan and I'm a Rangers fan. I don't root for them to win the games because I know that at best they're sort of a middle of the pack. Maybe they'll inch into the playoffs, Knicks or Rangers, but to what end? To what end? Just to get knocked out in the first round and then you lose the opportunity and to draft the next great player. And I don't recall this being as rampant throughout the 1970s and early
No.
1980s before Hakeem Olajuwon came along. And during those years, the high draft choices were much more reliable. You had, the Larry Birds, Michael Ray Richardson, Bernard King, Marcus Johnson. You had like bona fide, players that you could project as future NBA stars. Now it's a crapshoot almost because you're drafting one and done players, 18, 19 years old. They're not as easily projectable, and teams are still tanking. And when you take a significant part of your fan base rooting against the interest of winning just to solidify a draft slot, I think that's a byproduct of the salary cap and the lottery process working hand in hand to kind of disincentivize teams from trying to win and maybe turning off significant parts of their fan base, because now I find myself not necessarily rooting for my teams to win.
Yeah. So, and Sam Hinkie would say, yeah, you can't rely on one player. So that's why you have to do it several years in a row. That's why you have to do a 3-year tank or whatever, because
What's
you have to get 3 bites at the apple.
right?
Really, it's a product of multiple things. It's a more strategic and analytic front offices, and it's also a product of the era that we are in right now, which is the clustering of superstar players. Superstar players have taken control of their careers and enforced their way, use their power to cluster on teams. And so this is a very basic concept, but yet is a driving force, which is that there's only 3 ways to get players. You can trade for them, you can draft them, and you can sign them. Well, if you can't always make trades because it requires two to tango, and some players are not available, and then when some players are available, there's a bidding war, and you may be out of position, so it's hard to do trades, especially if a player isn't forcing his trade to your team. Signing players is generally been reserved for big markets. It's eluded the Knicks, which is a longer conversation, but it's eluded the Knicks. They haven't been able to take advantage of that. So the draft is your best opportunity that's controllable. And that is why teams have gone down that path, because they don't feel that they can stand on an equal footing on trades and signings. And that is even why when there are star player trades that have happened, that in recent years, that teams don't even prioritize getting players back for stars. They want draft picks back for stars. We've seen a series of trades over the last 4 or 5 years where there's been 3 and 4 draft picks traded in a trade, and then other years where they have the right to swap draft picks with the team to get a higher pick. And that is the basis of trades. And the reason is because those draft picks represent opportunities to draft players or currency to go out and trade for players when there comes time for a bidding war. And so really, Daniel, it really is an indication of the commoditization of that has happened with players. And I will say this is my 18th year covering the NBA. When I first started covering the NBA, the average fan did not know the basics of the salary cap. The average fan was focused on tonight's game. And I don't know if it's the proliferation of fantasy sports, both daily fantasy and your teams. I don't know if it's the proliferation of the internet so that people can read different parts of coverages. You're not relying only on your local beat writer who just covered sprained ankles and what the coach said after the game. I think it's a combination of all of these, but the fan has also become way more sophisticated in the way they view the league. And so you're talking about you as a Knicks fan evaluating the team completely differently on the final score. Whereas in 1987, you probably just looked at it as the final score. Maybe in even 2007, you just looked at it as the final score. It is an evolution of the nature of fandom and the nature of the NBA. And quite frankly, for somebody in my job who covers way more than the orange ball going through the orange ring, it's been terrific because it enables me to cover and write about things that are way on a different level, and it has elevated the overall intelligence of the fan, and I'm very thankful for that, even if it presents these conundrums that get to the basic part of competition.
So, Brian, you mentioned something. I flagged it when you said commoditization of players. So, we have just in a brief amount of time, I wanted to make just sure we fit in your thoughts on this. I think no more other place than college basketball are we feeling, maybe a shift in the landscape from name, image, and likeness rights kind of changing. So basketball is really the only sport where guys don't really have to go to college anymore to make it to the pros and make millions of dollars. I mentioned LaMelo Ball earlier, RJ Hampton, even going back, Dan and I's Knick fandom with Brandon Jennings years ago, going to Europe and kind of dropping in the draft and being available. Whereas maybe in a different world, right, he would have probably been the first overall pick in the draft had he not gone to Europe. So I want to get your thoughts, right? I think in college basketball, at least, the fact that there is no way to pay players, you're getting some top talent go directly into the G League and get paid 6 figures, low 6 figures, but still some amount of money. And meanwhile, they're kind of buying themselves and cashing them out of a world of the NCAA where we don't really know what players, if they can get paid, right, when it's going to happen, and how much they get paid, because we keep hearing terms like, the NCAA is going to place guardrails in front of players to make them not resemble pros. So to me and Dan as lawyers, we're hearing terms like guardrails and not wanting to resemble pros. And that realistically could be a cap of, let's say, $10,000 or $20,000. So I think players are kind of cashing themselves out. They're going to play overseas, and it's kind of helped LaMelo, right? I think the jury's still out on if it helped RJ Hampton. But Brian, what are your overall thoughts on how name, image, and likeness is kind of shaping the NBA at that level?
Yeah, so I think it's been maybe 12 or 13 years ago. The NBA imposed an age limit. And so there was this 1 year that the top players would have. And for a long time, they spent it at college. They would go to Duke for a year, they would go to Kentucky for a year, UCLA, and then they would move on. In the last 5 years, there's been an effort to commoditize that year. You mentioned Brendan Jennings. That's even longer than 5 years ago. But occasionally a player would go to China or to Europe. Brandon Jennings played in Italy. But Australia, the Australian League, the NBL there, which is a very progressive league, they're actually starting a bubble in Melbourne this week, where they're creating a bubble down there where fans are going to be able to come to the game. They're getting 10 to 15,000 fans. It's actually pretty smart. They decided that they were going to start offering these American teenagers a bunch of money for this 1 year. In some cases, like they were some of the highest paid players in their whole league. And the NBA were like, look, the NBA kind of declared war on the NCAA. I mean, war is a strong word, but that is valuable. That year is valuable, and there are ways to be quite frank, profit off of it, because that's what the colleges have been doing. And the players are like, forget this. If someone's going to profit off this, I gotta get in on this, whether that means going to China or that means going to Australia. And the NBA was like, look, we've got to take advantage of this. This is a lane for us to take advantage of. And so there is a G League bubble happening in Orlando. And I'm telling you guys, that G League bubble is only in existence because there's this team of 18-year-olds that's based in LA, but won't play in LA. I mean, if that team of 18-year-olds wasn't playing, I'm not sure they would even have a G League this year. Now, maybe somebody from the league office would come onto this call and shake their finger at me and say, how dare you? But I feel pretty confident about it. And they spent several $1 million on this collection of young guys who are going to come into this draft. And, why is the NBA doing this? Are they doing it out of the goodness of their hearts? No. They're doing it because they want to take that corner away from the NCAA, away from Australia, who was trying to take it, and China, who was trying to take it. And so that they can have a little 1-year league where they can take advantage of these guys and sell media rights for it, so that maybe next year Amazon buys it, or an over-the-air company buys it and puts it on television, and it's another product. And then not only are you monetizing it, basically getting in on the NCAA's monopoly that existed, but also promoting players who are coming to your league, which the NBA for years sort of said, well, we have a partnership with the NCAA because they have the NCAA tournament, and they showcase these guys who are going to come to the NBA. They make Zion Williamson a household name before he even comes to the NBA. Well, that's not untrue. Yes, that does happen, but why should Duke profit? Why should the NCAA profit off all of that? Why can't they get in on this action? And that's what they're essentially trying to do. They actually spent a couple of years researching whether they should go the European soccer route, where they would create academies and basically take these kids throughout high school and have them play against each other and put them on television. But I did some stories on this back then, and they when they researched it, they were like, you know what, we don't really want to get involved in being worried about making sure these kids go to class and the education. So they run academies, and they run academies in China, in Africa, in India, in other parts of the world. They had one in Australia for a while, but I think it's closed. They decided they didn't want to do that. So they're trying to cash in on this year of these guys. Now, maybe the age limit goes away. Maybe the age limit goes away and they still have guys who are not ready for the NBA and they go to this league. But every time the NCAA throws up another guardrail, to use that term, that makes getting the image and likeness, getting their market value harder, I think the NBA just smiles wider, because they're like, fine, we'll welcome those kids into our league. Now, it will not, right now, playing for this team that's based in San Francisco called, it's actually not LA, it's LA. It's based in San Francisco area called the Ignite. Playing for the G League Ignite um, isn't that exciting. It's certainly more exciting to go play for Duke or Kansas and playing on CBS on Sundays and playing in the NCAA tournament. That is still probably a little higher level, but that's in 2021. Who's to say by 2025? Right now, the top end guys are making $500,000 a year as 18-year-olds. Who's to say by 2025 that they don't have a media rights deal with a partner and those guys are making 1.5 million? And now it's a completely different arithmetic. And so the NCAA can say whatever they want. They can pretend like they can try to hold back and keep their hands on their profit center as long as they can. I wish them the best of luck on it. Maybe they can squeeze out another 5 to 10 years. Good luck, gentlemen. But when it becomes a truly open market, and these kids are going to be able to make the most money, they're gonna go where the money is. And
Brian, let me,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
in our last, because I know we're working in a time constraint. So I just, I just want to, for people that don't know Brian, has a long and storied path, and I think it's a good transition here because LeBron James, once upon a time, right? He was not necessarily a global superstar, but Brian, you mentioned at the top, you're good at seeing, I don't know, seeing these trends before they happen. And now, that was 10 years ago with the decision. Now we're very much in the player empowerment era. So Brian, we're talking about kind of kids seeing the bigger picture and looking at it. And we, a lot of our listeners are law students, college kids that are trying to figure out how to break into the sports industry. So just in the, the brief amount of time we have left, Brian, you saw the path, right? You were at, you had a local reporter, you saw LeBron, and then you kind of saw this movement happening. So any advice you could give to kind of kids trying to break in and maybe a little bit from your own personal background?
Yeah. Here's what I'd say. One of the greatest lessons I ever learned from LeBron was that life is long. People say life is short, life is long. And when LeBron was 18 years old, he sat in the office at Reebok. He went to school that day. Reebok picked him up in a car, took him to a private jet, flew him from Akron, Ohio to Boston. And Reebok didn't want him to go meet with Nike and Adidas. And they offered him, I don't remember how much they offered him, like 60 or 70 million dollars. And they pulled out a cashier's check for $10 million made out to him and put it on the table. This is a kid who's 18 years old who had lived in Section 8 housing most of his life. His mother rarely had a few $100s to her name. And they said, if you sign this contract with us tonight, LeBron, you can take this $10 million check. He could have gone to the bank the next morning and had $10 million. And at 18 years old, he said no, because he knew that the offers could get better, and he said life is long. And he ended up signing with Nike, and now it's $1 billion. He's going to make $1 billion from Nike in his career. And sure, he's made other mistakes, but life is long. Okay. You think today things are bad, things aren't going your way or whatever. And the other thing I learned about LeBron is sometimes you take an L. Almost nobody has lost as much as LeBron has. I don't mean in the regular season. This is a guy who's had to walk away from the finals with losses over and over and over. And he throws his shoulders back and comes back the next year. And, when LeBron loses a game on the road in Salt Lake City in the middle of January, he gets jeered and whatever by the crowd. He's like, all right, I took a loss tonight, but I'll be back tomorrow. And I still to this day am amazed at the perspective that he had as an 18-year-old. And it could be a lesson for a lot of people. Yeah, he can teach a lot of people how to play basketball. He can teach people a lesson about doing a lot of things. So I really respect that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been amazed at his longevity, maintaining that high quality level for almost 20 years with really, he's still playing at an MVP caliber level. How much longer do you think he'll be able to, or how much longer do you think he'll play in the NBA?
You know what? As long as his body holds up,
Um,
who knows? I don't think it's going to be short, though, Daniel. I think there's multiple years left.
Brian, we really appreciate jumping on the pod with us.
All right, I do too. So,
Yeah, and the article, everyone, I recommend everyone to check it out. Top Shot, I think, is the future. And Brian, I think, has enough credibility at this point that he's seeing trends ahead of time, be it the bubble, be it LeBron, and now maybe Top Shot. This might be a little bit of a GameStop opportunity, but this is not an investment podcast, so don't.
Yeah, I'm not recommending it. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
thank you very
Take
much,
care.
Brian.